The silence in our home had always felt peaceful, a sanctuary from the high-stakes world of the law firm where I worked as a paralegal. But that night, the silence was heavy, curdled by the discovery I'd just made in Simon's home office. I stood over his desk, my breath hitching as I stared at the dental practice's secondary ledger. It wasn't about root canals or crowns. It was a meticulous map of consultation fees that flowed into the millions, linked to names that made my blood run cold. "You weren't supposed to find that, Clara," Simon's voice cut through the dark. I jumped, the ledger slipping from my numb fingers. He was standing in the doorway, still in his scrubs, his face a mask of disappointment rather than guilt. "Simon, what is this?" I asked, my voice trembling. These are shell companies linked to the Navarro cartel. You're laundering their blood money through your practice?" "It's just business, Clara," he said, stepping into the room. He looked so normal, the man I'd shared a bed with for years. "The overhead for a dental practice is massive. They helped me and I helped them." "I'm going to the police," I whispered, backing away toward the window. "I can't be part of this. I'm an officer of the court, Simon. This is people's lives." Simon sighed, a sound of weary regret. "I was afraid you'd say that. You always were too moral for your own good. It's a shame. We had a good run." "What are you doing?" I gasped as he reached for his phone. "Calling a specialist," he said. "A cleaner. If I let you walk out that door, the cartel kills us both. If I do this, only one of us has to go. And I've always been better at surviving than you." The specialist arrived 20 minutes later while Simon sat in the kitchen, calmly sipping a glass of water. I was locked in the office, screaming, clawing at the door. When the man entered, he didn't look like a monster. He looked like a plumber. He carried a heavy silencer-equipped pistol and a set of gloves. "Make it look like a home invasion," Simon said from the hallway. "Take the jewelry. Break the back door. Just make it quick." The last thing I felt was the cold metal against my temple. The last thing I heard was the sound of my own heart, a frantic, drum-like beat that suddenly, violently, stopped. I bolted upright, a scream tearing through my throat. I was drenched in sweat, my hands flying to my temple, expecting to find a hole, blood, the end of everything. But there was nothing, only smooth skin and the soft, cool touch of silk sheets. "Clara? Honey, what's wrong?" I froze. That voice. Simon was sitting up beside me, his hand reaching out to touch my shoulder. I flinched so hard I nearly fell off the bed. I looked around, my eyes darting wildly. This was our bedroom. The sun was streaming in, bright and cheerful. "Nightmare?" Simon asked, his voice full of that practiced, gentle concern I now knew was a lie. I looked at the nightstand. The digital clock read June 21st. My breath hitched. What year is it, Simon?" He chuckled, rubbing his eyes. "Too much wine last night?" "It's our 3rd anniversary, Clara. 3 years since I convinced the smartest woman I know to say I do. Don't tell me you forgot." 3rd anniversary. I was back. I was 2 years away from that night in the office. 2 years before the cleaner, and the cartel, and the blood on the ledger. I didn't forget, I managed to say, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. It was a very vivid dream. "I think I need some water." "I'll get it," Simon said, sliding out of bed. He looked so lean, so handsome in his pajama pants. I watched his back as he walked toward the door, and all I could see was the shadow of the man who had watched me be murdered while he drank a glass of water. I waited until I heard the tap running downstairs. I grabbed my phone and checked the news. The world was as it should be. I wasn't a ghost. I had been given a reset. But the terror didn't leave me. It sat in my stomach like a cold stone. I knew what was under the floorboards of his successful practice. I knew the names in the ledger. "Here you go," Simon said, returning with a glass. "Drink up. We have a big day. Dinner at that French place you love, and I have a surprise for you." I took the glass, my fingers brushing his. I wanted to vomit. I knew his surprises. I knew his specialists. "Happy anniversary, Simon," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. Walking into the offices of Sterling, Vance and Thorne felt like stepping onto a battlefield where I was the only soldier without armor. The familiar hum of the high-end printers, the scent of expensive dark roast coffee, and the sharp click of heels on marble floors. Everything was exactly as it should be. Yet, to me, every sound was a trigger. I sat at my mahogany desk, my fingers hovering over a keyboard that felt foreign. I was supposed to be drafting a motion for summary judgment, but all I could see was the ghost of a ledger and the cold barrel of a silencer. "You look like you're preparing for a deposition with the devil, Clara," a voice rumbled from above me. I gasped, my heart leaping into my throat. I looked up to see Xavier Thorne leaning against the edge of my cubicle. Xavier was the firm's lead defense attorney, a man the tabloids called the Lion and the prosecutors called a nightmare. He was tall, with eyes as sharp as a scalpel and a presence that seemed to swallow the light in the room. He was the kind of man who noticed every twitch, every lie, and every hesitation. "Just a long night, Xavier," I said, trying to force a professional smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "I think the caffeine hasn't kicked in yet." Xavier didn't move. He straightened up, crossing his arms over his chest, his gaze scanning my face with a terrifying intensity. "You're a terrible liar, Clara. Your hands are shaking, and you've been staring at a blank Word document for 20 minutes. And more importantly," he leaned in closer, his voice dropping into a low, private register, "why are you wearing your wedding ring on a chain under your blouse instead of on your finger?" I instinctively reached for my collar, feeling the cold weight of the gold band resting against my skin. I couldn't bear the feeling of it on my hand anymore. It felt like a shackle made of bone and betrayal. "It's just a style choice," I lied, my voice trembling. Xavier let out a short, dry laugh. "A style choice? You've been the most meticulously consistent person in this firm for 5 years. If you've moved that ring, it's because you finally realized what I told you 3 years ago was true." "And what was that?" I asked, looking up at him. "That Simon is a slime-covered shark who happened to learn how to fix teeth," Xavier said, his expression hardening. "I told you his dental practice's growth was impossible. Men like him don't have lucky streaks in business. They have silent partners who don't like to pay taxes. If he's finally shown you his true face, Clara, you need to know that you aren't alone." I felt a lump form in my throat. In my previous life, I had dismissed Xavier's warnings as professional jealousy or his general cynicism toward happy marriages. Now, his words were a lifeline. "I don't know what you mean," I whispered, though my eyes were pleading with him to keep talking. "Listen to me carefully," Xavier said, stepping around my desk to block the view from the rest of the office. "I set up a trust fund in your name the day you married him. It's an offshore account in the Caymans that Simon has no legal claim to. I've been funneling a portion of your bonuses into it for years, along with a contingency fee of my own. I kept it ready because I knew a day would come when you'd need to run, or you'd need to buy a very expensive set of consequences for that man." "Why?" I choked out, stunned by the sheer depth of his foresight. "Why would you go to those lengths for me?" "Because you're the most brilliant legal mind in this building, and you are being wasted on a man who launders money through root canals," Xavier said. He reached into his vest pocket and slid a small, matte black business card across my desk. "That's my private line. Not the office, not the secretary. Just me. If he touches you, or if you find something you can't unsee, you call me first. Don't go to the police. Don't go home. Just call." I stared at the card, the black ink shimmering under the fluorescent lights. For the first time since waking up on my anniversary, the crushing weight of the future felt slightly lighter. I wasn't just a victim waiting for a hitman. I was a paralegal with the lion of the courtroom at my back. "I'm not scared, Xavier," I said, my voice finally finding its steel. "I'm just getting started." "Good," Xavier said, a shark-like grin touching his lips. "Because I've been waiting 3 years for you to invite me to this fight." For the next 2 weeks, I lived 2 lives. In the morning, I was the devoted wife, the woman who laughed at Simon's jokes and let him kiss my cheek before he headed to his dental practice. I watched him through the kitchen window, his white coat draped over his arm, looking for all the world like a pillar of the community. In the evening, I was a ghost in my own house, slipping out of bed while he slept to analyze bank statements and property records. I knew from my previous life that the big ledger wouldn't be in his home office for another year. He was still too cautious, still too new to the Navarro cartel's payroll. If I wanted to find the proof now, I had to go to the source, the practice itself. "I thought I'd drop by and take you to lunch, Simon," I said over the phone on Tuesday morning, since we didn't get much time together on our anniversary. "That's a lovely idea, Clara," he said, his voice warm over the line. "But I have a packed schedule. Root canals, all morning." "I don't mind waiting in your office," I replied, my voice sweet and insistent. "I have some paperwork for Xavier I can catch up on. I just want to see you." "Well, if you don't mind the wait, I suppose it's fine," he said. I arrived at Vance Dental 20 minutes later. The waiting room was pristine. White leather chairs, calming jazz, and the smell of mint and sterilization. It was the perfect front. I waved to the receptionist, Sarah, and made my way to Simon's private office in the back. As soon as the door clicked shut, I went to work. I wasn't looking for a smoking gun in his top drawer. Simon was too smart for that. I was looking for the boring stuff, the supply orders. In my previous life, I'd spent months at the firm reviewing medical malpractice and fraud cases. I knew exactly what a clean inventory looked like. I found the recent invoices from MedTech Logistics. On paper, Simon was ordering enough lidocaine and porcelain crowns to service half the city. "Why are you ordering 5,000 units of anesthetic for a 3-chair practice, Simon?" I whispered to the empty room. I pulled up a spreadsheet on his computer. He'd never changed his password, Clara0621, our anniversary. My stomach turned at the irony. I compared the purchase orders to his patient logs. He was paying for the supplies with clean business revenue, but the physical stock was being returned to a shell company called N Global Shipping for a fraction of the cost. It was a classic buyback scheme to move cash. Suddenly, the door handle turned. I barely had time to minimize the screen and grab a magazine from the coffee table. "Still working on those briefs, I see," Simon said, walking in. He looked tired, a smudge of white dust on his scrub top. "Xavier is a slave driver," I said, forced laughter bubbling in my throat. "I was just looking at your new office chair. It looks expensive, Simon." He narrowed his eyes, his gaze darting to the computer screen for a split second before returning to me. "It's an investment. Better ergonomics means better precision. You're very curious today, aren't you?" "I'm just proud of you," I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. "You've built all this from nothing." "Not exactly nothing," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "I had help, and I need to make sure that help stays confidential." He stepped closer, his hand reaching out to tuck a stray hair behind my ear. His fingers were cold, smelling of latex and chemicals. "Clara, if you ever have questions about the business, ask me. Don't go digging. It's complicated, and I wouldn't want you to get a headache over something that doesn't concern you." "I understand, Simon," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Good," he said. "Now let's go to lunch. I'm starving." I followed him out, but as soon as we reached the restaurant, I excused myself to the restroom. I dialed Xavier's private line. "I have the supplier names," I whispered into the phone. "He's using N Global Shipping. Xavier, they're moving the stock this Friday. He mentioned investors coming to dinner. The timeline has shifted. The Navarros are coming to the house 3 months earlier than they did last time." "Then we don't have months, Clara," Xavier said, his voice a low, commanding rasp. "We have 72 hours. Stay calm. Don't let him see you sweat. I'm calling my contact at the bureau. We're going to turn your dinner party into a federal sting." "Xavier?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Yeah. Don't let me be in that house alone with him when it happens," I said. "I'll be right outside," he said. "I promise." The offices of Sterling, Vance, and Thorne were usually bustling with the frantic energy of junior associates, but at 9 p.m., the silence was absolute. The city lights of the skyline flickered through the floor-to-ceiling glass, making the room feel like a floating island of cold ambition. I sat in the plush velvet chair opposite Xavier's desk, my hands tucked into the sleeves of my coat to hide the tremors that wouldn't stop. Clara, this is Special Agent Miller, Xavier said, gesturing to a man in a nondescript charcoal suit sitting in the shadows of the corner. He's with the Organized Crime Division. He's been looking at the Navarros for a long time, but he's been missing the bridge between the street and the bank. You just handed him that bridge. I looked at Miller, who nodded solemnly. I laid the printouts of the MedTech logistics invoices on the desk. It's all here, I said, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. The overordering, the buyback credits, the links to N Global. Simon isn't just a dentist. He's a specialized washing machine. This evidence is compelling, Agent Miller said, leaning forward into the light. But for us to act on a sting this quickly, we need a proffer. We need you to go on the record, Clara. In exchange, we provide full immunity and witness protection. Immunity for what? I asked, a spark of panic igniting in my chest. I didn't do anything. In the eyes of the law, you're the spouse of a high-level money launderer with access to his accounts, Xavier said, his voice dropping into that protective, low rumble. Without a formal agreement, they could argue you were a co-conspirator. I'm not letting them touch a hair on your head, Clara. That's why I've already drafted the proffer. You sign this, and you are the star witness, not a defendant. He slid a thick document across the desk. I looked at the legal jargon, the words blurring. This was the moment of no return. If I signed this, Simon's life, the life I had shared with him, would officially be over. Sign it, Clara, Xavier whispered. And then I'll show you why I'm the only man you can trust. I signed. Think felt like a blood pact. Once the agent took the papers and stepped out to take a call, the room felt smaller, more intimate. Xavier stood up and walked to a small painting behind his desk. He moved it aside to reveal a hidden safe. He didn't use a digital code. He used an old-fashioned key he kept on his person. He pulled out a black, fireproof box and set it on the desk between us. You asked why I set up a trust, he said. He opened the lid. Inside wasn't just a bank ledger. There was a passport with my photo but a different name, Xavier Thorne. There were keys to a property in Switzerland and a debit card linked to an offshore account with 7 figures. It's more than a trust fund, Clara, Xavier said, looking me directly in the eye. It's a clean slate. I've been funneling money from my own private bonuses into this for 3 years. I knew Simon was dirty the moment I met him at that firm Christmas party. I saw how he looked at your family's inheritance, and I saw the associates he kept in the shadows. Xavier, this is millions of dollars, I gasped, staring at the passport. Why would you go this far for a paralegal? Because I watched you marry a monster while I sat in the front row, helpless to stop it, Xavier said, his voice thick with a raw, suppressed emotion. I've spent 3 years waiting for the mask to slip. I didn't just want to save you from him. I wanted to give you the world he tried to steal. You aren't going back to that house after Friday. You're going to the airport. What about you? I asked, reaching out to touch the black box. I'll be right behind you, Xavier said, his hand covering mine. But first, we have to survive a dinner with the Navarros. Are you ready to play the part of the perfect, oblivious wife one last time? I've been playing it for 3 years, I said, my voice hardening. I can do it for one more night. That's my girl, Xavier said, a shark-like grin touching his lips. Let's go to work. The air in the house was thick, not just with the humidity of a summer evening, but with the suffocating weight of a trap about to spring. I stood before the vanity mirror, smoothing the silk of my crimson dress. It was a bold, blood-red garment that felt like armor. My hands were finally steady, tempered by the cold resolve that had replaced my fear. A soft click at the bedroom door made me whirl around. I expected Simon, but it was Xavier. He had slipped in through the back entrance we'd left unlocked for the federal team. He wasn't in his courtroom suit. He was dressed in tactical black, an earpiece glinting in the dim light. You look dangerous, Clara, he said, his voice a low, gravelly hum that sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with terror. He walked toward me, his presence filling the room, pushing back the shadows of the life I was about to leave behind. I feel like a target, I whispered, turning back to the mirror to hide the flush creeping up my neck. Xavier stepped behind me, his reflection towering over mine. He reached out, his fingers grazing my bare shoulder as he adjusted the thin strap of my dress. His touch was electric, a searing contrast to the clinical coldness I had come to expect from men. He didn't pull away. Instead, his hand lingered, his thumb tracing the line of my collarbone. "You aren't the target tonight. You're the bait," he murmured, his eyes locking onto mine in the mirror. They weren't flinty or professional. They were burning with a fierce, possessive heat. "And for the record, red is definitely your color. It makes me want to burn this whole house down just to see you walk out of the flames." "Xavier." I breathed, my heart hammering a new, frantic rhythm. "We have a job to do." "I know," he said, his face dipping close to my ear, his breath warm against my skin. "But when this is over and we're on that plane, I'm going to remind you every single day that you don't belong to a ghost or a dental practice. You belong to yourself. And maybe, if I'm lucky, you'll let me be the one who keeps you safe." He leaned in, his lips brushing the sensitive skin just below my ear for a fraction of a second. A promise, not a plea. Before he straightened up, the lion, mask sliding back into place. The Navarro just pulled into the driveway. "Get downstairs. I'll be in your ear the whole time." I took a breath, the scent of his cologne, sandalwood and steel, giving me the strength to descend the stairs. Dinner was a nightmare of forced smiles and lethal undertones. Simon was beaming, playing the role of the successful entrepreneur, while Navarro sat across from me, his eyes like those of a shark sensing blood in the water. "To new beginnings," Simon said, raising his wine glass. "To the truth," I replied, catching the glint of the hidden camera inside the floral centerpiece. Under the table, my phone buzzed 3 times. The signal. "Simon, I forgot the vintage port in the pantry," I said, standing up with a practiced grace. "I'll be right back." "Don't be long, darling," Simon said, his eyes already returning to Matteo to discuss shipping logistics. I didn't go to the pantry. I bolted for the reinforced safe room Xavier had prepped. The moment the heavy steel door clicked shut, the world outside exploded. Boom. The flashbangs echoed even through the thick walls. On the security monitor, I watched the dining room turn into a swarm of tactical gear and red laser dots. Simon was shoved onto the table, his face pressed into the expensive linen he'd been so proud of. Navarro didn't even fight. He simply looked into the camera with a chilling, silent vow of vengeance. But all I looked at was the corner of the screen where Xavier appeared, weapon drawn, moving with a predator's grace to ensure the path to the safe room was clear. He looked at the camera and winked, a flash of the man who had promised me the world. The interior of the black SUV was a sanctuary of cool leather and shadows as we sped away from the sirens and the shattered remains of my old life. The rain had started to fall, streaking the windows like tears I refused to shed. I was huddled in the back seat, the adrenaline finally receding, leaving me hollow and shaking. Xavier sat beside me, his tactical vest discarded, revealing the black t-shirt underneath that clung to his frame. He didn't say anything at first. He just reached out and pulled me toward him, his arm a solid, warm weight across my shoulders. "Check her," Xavier said to the driver, but then he shook his head and looked at me. "Actually stay focused on the road." "I'll do it." He turned to me, his hands moving with a gentleness that contradicted the lethal efficiency I'd seen an hour ago. He checked my wrists where Simon had grabbed me, his fingers lingering on the skin. "He didn't hurt you, did he?" Xavier asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Only my pride," I whispered, looking up at him. The dim light of the passing street lamps illuminated the sharp line of his jaw and the fierce protectiveness in his eyes. "You did perfectly, Clara," he said. He didn't pull his hand away. Instead, he moved it to the back of my neck, his thumb grazing the spot where he'd kissed me earlier. The tension between us was a physical thing, vibrating in the small space of the car. I've never seen a witness keep their cool like that. "You were magnificent. I had the best legal counsel," I teased, my voice breathy. Xavier leaned in, his face inches from mine. "I'm not your lawyer anymore, Clara. The proffer is signed. The case is built. From here on out, I'm just a man who's been waiting 3 years to have you to himself." He was about to say more when his phone buzzed, a sharp, insistent vibration against the leather seat. He pulled back, his expression instantly shifting into the lion persona as he checked the encrypted message. "It's Miller," Xavier said, his eyes scanning the screen. "Simon reached the holding facility 10 minutes ago. He tried to claim he was an informant. He told them he had a ledger that would take down the entire Navarro hierarchy. He's trying to trade," I said, a chill running through me. "He's trying to survive," Xavier corrected. "But the FBI isn't the only one with ears in that facility. Miller just confirmed that the Navarro cleaner, the one who made your death look like an accident in the other life, was already processed into the same block an hour before the raid." My breath hitched. "Xavier." "He's gone, Clara," Xavier said, his voice cold and final. A riot broke out in the intake hall. Spontaneous. Simon was accidentally diverted into a blind spot. It took 30 seconds. They found a sharpened toothbrush in his carotid. The cartel thinks he was the rat who tipped off the feds, and the feds get to keep their hands clean while the trash takes itself out. I leaned back against the seat, closing my eyes. I thought I would feel guilty, but all I felt was a profound sense of justice. The man who had watched me die was now a statistic in a cold prison hallway. "Look at me," Xavier commanded softly. I opened my eyes. He was closer now, his hand moving to my waist, drawing me flush against him. "It's over," he said. "The debt is paid. The ghost is dead. Now look at that airfield ahead and tell me what you see." I looked out the window. A small, private jet sat on the tarmac, its lights blinking against the dark, main sky. "I see a clean slate," I said. "I see a woman I'm going to spend the next 40 years trying to impress," Xavier replied. He leaned down, and this time there was no interruption. His lips met mine, a deep, hungry kiss that tasted of sandalwood, rain, and a future that was finally, legally, ours. The hum of the private jet's engines finally faded into a luxurious silence as we touched down on a private strip in Amalfi. The transition was jarring. Only 12 hours ago, I was clutching a panic room door while federal agents swarmed my home in the rain. Now, the air that drifted through the open cabin door was warm, heavy with the scent of blooming jasmine and the sharp, clean salt of the Tyrrhenian Sea. Xavier stood up, stretching his broad shoulders. The tactical gear was a memory. He wore a white linen shirt now, the top few buttons undone, looking more like a relaxed aristocrat than the lion, who had just dismantled a cartel-connected dental empire. He reached out his hand to me, his eyes searching mine. "Ready to step into the light, Clara?" he asked. "I've spent so long in the dark, I'm not sure I'll know how to act," I said, placing my hand in his. His grip was firm, a constant anchor in the sea of my uncertainty. We were driven in a vintage convertible along winding cliffside roads. To my right, the ocean was a deep, impossible turquoise, sparkling under a sun that didn't feel like a threat. We pulled up to a villa that looked like it had been carved directly out of the white stone of the coast. Bougainvilleas spilled over the terraces in a riot of magenta. "This is the property from the box," I whispered as we stepped onto the main terrace. "The one in Switzerland was a decoy, wasn't it?" "Safety first, Clara," Xavier said, walking up behind me. He wrapped his arms around my waist, his chest a solid wall of heat against my back. "The house in the Alps is for the paper trail. This is for us. I bought this 5 years ago, the week you told me you were marrying Simon. I couldn't bear the thought of you trapped in that gray city forever." I turned in his arms, my heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and a deep, aching desire. "You've been planning my escape for 5 years?" "I was planning your happiness," he corrected, his voice dropping into that low, velvet rasp. He reached up, his thumb tracing the curve of my bottom lip. "I knew that one day you'd wake up and see him for what he was. I just didn't expect you to do it with such flair." "I had to die once to find my spine, Xavier," I said, leaning my forehead against his. "I won't waste this life." "Good," he said. He leaned down, his lips ghosting over mine, teasingly close. "Because I have a lot of lost time to make up for. I've spent 3 years watching you across a boardroom, pretending I didn't want to carry you out of there and never look back. He swept me up into his arms, a sudden, playful movement that made me gasp and laugh, a sound I hadn't made in what felt like centuries. He carried me toward the master suite, where the floor-to-ceiling windows were open to the sea breeze. "Xavier," I laughed, clutching his neck. "What are you doing?" "I'm exercising my rights as your sole legal representative," he said, a wicked, flirtatious glint in his eyes as he set me down on the edge of the silk-draped bed. He didn't pull away. He hovered over me, his hands pinning mine gently to the mattress. "And my first motion is that we stay in this room until the sun goes down. Do you have any objections, counselor?" "None," I whispered, reaching up to pull him down to me. "The defense rests." As he kissed me, a slow, deep, and possessive claim that finally erased the last of the cold shadows, I realized that the cleaner hadn't just taken Simon. He had cleared the path for the only man who had ever truly seen me. The war was over. The Mediterranean sun was high. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I was exactly where I was meant to be.